to help customers like yourself. So I'm just gonna jump straight into the demo. Please pause me at any point in time, and I'll use the demo to talk about the various technological aspects that we have in the platform. So at a very high level, the main paradigm shift that we are bringing to the market is the ability to ask questions directly on the data in what is called as controlled natural language. And this controlled natural language is, I wanted to make sure everyone can see my screen over here. Is the font too small? Should I blow it up, or is this okay?
It's okay for us.
All right. Is this one goes talk to me using chat box below?
No. So all of this is in the. That's right. So it'll talk to various chat technologies below. But underlying the whole platform has everything you need for being able to do the data analysis and visualization and things like that, as you'll see in a second. So we'll start by connecting to a database. In this case, we've already loaded database, and we are simply just going to bring that into this session. And as you do that, it tells you here is the data that we've pulled in. And this is stuff that we got from Eagle in terms of putting this demo together. And now we can start to work with this chat application. Around each of these surfaces, and I'll go back to where we came from here, which is the enterprise dashboard. There are a variety of different apps. We can create new apps. Each app has its own natural language surface, and that natural language surface has a certain structure, as we'll see. And that structure is largely driven by having an additional recommendation engine that works with the user at all points in time to help them figure out how to interact with the system. So the first set of things over here that we'll start with is to go and look at the quantity of parts used across different facilities. So as you do that, we can see that you start typing. And as you type, it's going to tell you here are the different types of things that you can ask of the system. And over time, as things that are not here that we need to add, those can also be added to the system. But the whole paradigm behind this controlled natural language way of interacting is that whatever you ask will always get answered in an unambiguous way and in a clean way, as we will see in a little bit. So you're going to say, show the cost of parts used. And we can do that for a number of different ways. So for example, let's just go and see the cost of parts used for each facility. And so this tells us what the cost of each of those facilities are. So here, for example, Richmond is about 100K in total parts used across all the different work orders that have been carried out on that facility. At any point in time, if you wanted to go and zoom into any portion of this data, go ahead. Was there a question? If you wanted to zoom into any portion of the data, you'd basically go do that. Everything is live and interactive in the system. And a key part of what's driving every aspect of what's happening in the platform is a rich AI ML technology that goes behind every little interaction, including this chart was just put together by looking at the data, figuring out what's the best way to render it, and then rendered it on the fly over there. If you wanted to go and take a look at what the data is, and you wanted to go and poke around that some more, so you can always say things like sample, and that's just going to give you an actual sample of what the data is behind that chart. And you can actually go and interact with that entire tabular data if you wanted to, but by default in ASTI, you will go and try and visualize the data whenever that makes sense. There's a little bit of feedback.
Prashad and Harry, do you guys have two phones?
Harish, I think if you have both, I think if someone has both a phone and the GoTo app, maybe that's feeding back. Oh, that's much better.
Okay, whatever it was went away.
Was there a question?
No, go ahead, please proceed.
Okay, all right. Now we can also do other more interesting things over here. So, for example, I'm going to go and do this, which is showing the number of orders for each facility name where the description, and I'll slow down over here. I'm getting that feedback again. I don't know if everyone else is. We can show the number of orders.
Let me call it. I'm using a laptop. Maybe that's causing a problem. Let me call it with the phone.
Or maybe just put it on mute if you're not, then you're not speaking, and that will do the trick. Okay, great, that worked. Okay, so now we're going to see the number of orders for each facility name. So let's just go and take a look at that first. And now you can see this is just the raw number of orders. We can also go make that a little bit more sophisticated. So if you wanted to ask more complicated questions, you can say, for example, where, description, and contains, let's say, the word doc. And you can see that there are far fewer number of records that show up. For example, Sacramento now is 143, and before that, Sacramento was 2,573. So this is, you can drill down through the data, start looking through different dimensions of the data, and start to go and essentially problem solve as an end decision maker. How do I go and write the program or find the right sort of menu buttons or figure out what's the right way to go and get that data? Okay. You can also, I'll keep going, but please stop me if you have questions. You can say, show, for example, the most expensive part. So let's go do that. And that's going to say there are 2 entries in this data set. And so there might be some redundancy in the way it is put in there, but there are 2 FlexStart controllers. They are registered and they're priced at 16,000 and change. Okay. We can also go and do things where we are looking at top 5 kinds of analysis or ranked kind of analysis. So for example, we can go and say, show the quantity of parts used for each facility name, listing the top 5, and then you can do that. At this point, I'll pause a little bit and say that the main technology shift that we have, unlike a lot of the other technology that you kind of see in the general chatbot interface, is this notion of this controlled natural language, right? Which you see as this recommendation engine goes through and shows you as to what's happening, what are the kinds of things that you can talk about. Now, the key aspect of that is if you take arbitrary chat technology that's out over there, there's a very small but subtle chance that it's going to misinterpret what you asked for it and give you, unknowing to even the system, results that are not accurate. If you just mathematically model that, if I'm going to ask 20 questions and there's 5% chance of error in each one of those questions, at the end of 20 questions, you are basically have more than a 50% chance that something that you asked has had an error and maybe you didn't even realize that. And so that's a core part of the technology that we invented. We actually went through that whole process of general natural language, found that this error rate kills things in the enterprise space, and then developed this whole set of technologies around this controlled natural language, which is natural for users to go and interact with, and directly allows the whole underlying technology to be very consistent and accurate in terms of how it pulls out the answers. Now, at any point in time, if you wanted to go and look at the data, I told you that you can always go and sample the data. But the other thing you can do is you can say you can export this data into a CSV file. So you can always do things like that. And this basically means inside data chat, you can if you ever hit a limitation saying here are things that I want to do and I really want to get my hands on the data, you can always go and pull up and export whatever is the data set that was the answer to the question that you asked. And maybe you wanted to share it with someone else or do something else. You can also, of course, share the conversation that you had with other users. But there's a direct way to actually get your hands on the underlying data once you've gotten to a specific answer. And basically, we want to be open in that sense to allow people to not be constrained by what they can do with the data. So you can always take the answers that you have gotten in the form of a CSV file outside. Questions?
Yeah, so when you say export this data, you're talking about not the whole underlying data, but the output of the previous query, right?
That is correct. Yep, it's the output of the question that you just asked and just that very thing. So it'll basically have 2 columns, max downtime. We were just looking for downtime and the facility name.
Okay. So let's say I ask a query and you display, a visualization, and would I be able to modify that visualization, not the data, but the visualization?
Yeah, so let's let's go back to one of the original questions that we have. So for example, show the number of orders for each one that contains this. You can modify that. So, and for example, you can say, I want to do a scatter chart with facility name and y-axis as number of orders, and you could go and make a change that way. So that visualization, and by the way, as you do that, we do, as I said, we do a whole bunch of statistical analysis behind the scenes, and we'll go and pull out that, hey, by the way, we just want to warn you that we are only showing you all the data except for one, which is 3% of all the data that is in the sample, because it doesn't have a facility name. So I can't really plot it on a scatter plot, and you can actually go and look at that if you need to, but we'll go pull that out. We've got a whole bunch of visualizations that are built into that, and you can change the visualization. By default, the chat technology and the engine inside will go and pick the visualization that it thinks most appropriate, but you could overwrite that. And of course, if we end up at a situation where you say, hey, we really want this specific type of visualizations of the bar, we'll go and retrain the system for a certain class of queries that you're interested in to be able to go and pick the default visualization that is more suitable for you. But there's a whole set of rich visualization that are inbuilt, and you can take over and go into that space if you want to.
Okay.
Other questions?
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe you're going to cover this later, but I was wondering, so you're displaying the information, but how do I know what's the time frame?
I didn't understand the question. So time frame meaning what time was?
In the sense, is this for the past 1 month, 1 year, 10 years, 1 day? How do I know that?
So I don't know. Harshad, Wasik, did you give us the timestamp information in there?
The data was actually for, let me remember because I sent you a month ago. So data was for last, let me see. That was for the total number.
This is kind of the data we got to answer your question. So for example, yep, we do have timestamps in there. So right now this is aggregated over all the different times that are in there. And now if you wanted us to go and do it by certain amounts of time, we can go and extend that information to do that. Underlying this, there's always this way. So for example, which dates of these matter to you the most? Is it like the required date, work start date, completion date, or something else?
Yeah, I don't know. Somebody,
okay,
possibly Craig or Josh, maybe.
So I'm just gonna say I'm gonna go do things like that. And so underlying this is what I exposed to you in that language surface was very focused. And think of it like apps in the app ecosystem, right? So maybe you want Ask Steve to be very focused and just get this high-level questions because it's targeted towards a specific user who just wants to ask these questions and wants the answer to that. So maybe someone who's a factory floor manager, for example. But you might want to also ask far more detailed questions. You can think of it as a different app. We could build everything in the same app, but just as you have a different app for weather and probably a different app for checking a portfolio, generally it's a good idea to break that up into different apps. Regardless, underlying in the platform is technology to go and do all kinds of detailed work of the types that you just mentioned. So here, for example, the original data set had information about the dates that were in this form. I just asked it to extract day, month, year from the work start date. And so it basically went and pulled that out. So you were looking for the month. So now we have this new field that was created, which is the month. And now if you wanted to say, keep the rows where work start month is 9, that's basically what you'll end up going and doing and pulling that information and restricting it just to that. Or you could be doing other kinds of compute commands saying compute total count of records for each work start date, month, the field that we just created, for example. Does that help?
Okay, so that's
And so the way we recommend is that create a couple different apps, keep based upon the business function, and the high-level business function, someone who just wants to go and look at how's my factory performing, where am I spending more in repairs and stuff like that. We'll create that. And then in this part, it's kind of like, as you can see from the symbol, the Swiss Army knife. You can do all stuff, including what I just showed you over there. But maybe not everyone needs to do that. So you don't want to overload the app that way. And so generally, that's what we recommend. But the technology allows us to put everything in one. It may not be the best way for you to deliver and use the product, depending upon the business functions that are going to be using this.
I'll point out to Craig and the Amerisource people that the data set that the professor is using is work orders only, closed work orders, and we gave them a CSV file. When we finish the integration of Ask Steve, it will actually be on the live SQL files and have access to all of the various components of the system. So you could look at open work orders, you could look at closed work orders, you could look at work orders in process for a specific technician. You could ask any sorts of questions about anything within the entire database using Ask Steve. But at this point in time, for proof of concept purposes, we just created a integration with a CSV file.
Yes. Hey, Harry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I was talking last time and you guys couldn't hear me, I don't think. So I think to Harish's point, yeah, there's looks like the filtering capabilities in there so you can set date ranges and so on. You know, we're talking specifically about the CMMS here, and I'm not sure what questions Harish had asked earlier regarding, you know, automation, but obviously that's an area that, you know, we're certainly, you know, we certainly want to do more integration with to be able to be more predictive, enunciate alarms and so on, and be able to look at statistics. How far out are you guys from accomplishing that with Rockwell at this point, you know? And then the second question would be, you know, will this be able to be used for other databases as well? So, you know, or the technology be there. So for example, you know, which is managing the sort director servers and so on. So those have a lot of sortation information in them. And if we wanted to use the information to pull, or we wanted to ask questions regarding the sort director database, is that something that this system would be able to do? And does there have to be a lot of customization, or is it pretty simple? Drop in the database. It understands what the relationships are between the tables and the attributes and so on. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Yep, that makes sense. So Harry, should I take a crack?
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
So the way the underlying technology works is that as we started this, we connect to a database. And so when we connect to a database, if it's a SQL database like what is set up at Eagle, we'll go and pull that information from there. And the connection should be pretty easy. And that's part of the integration stuff we have to do as we get further into this project. You can load things from CSV files. As we load things from CSV files, we automatically do what is called type inferencing. So we'll figure out what the underlying types of the data is and automatically figure out what each of those fields mean. So we do a lot of the integration directly when we connect to databases. Now, will that mean that there is nothing that we have to do as far as customization? It will really depend upon how the database is set up. But if you have fairly standard structured SQL databases set up, a lot of things should be relatively straightforward. The part that does always requires certain thinking is producing that specific type of language surface that you care about, right? Because there's this nice balance, this balancing act between just giving an arbitrary way to interact with the data. And going back again, AVA is that Swiss Army knife. I'm going to switch over to that. Is that arbitrary way of connecting to data. So for example, I could say load data from file. Here, I'm just going to go and load data from a file where we have information about loans, for example, completely different set of data set. But the whole point is within that general application of being able to interact with data, you can do all kinds of things, effectively being able to go and ask different kinds of compute-related questions on that. Then when we say we want, it's kind of like on your phone, you have a browser app, and you could certainly go and find out weather information by going to the browser app. So AVA is kind of like that browser app. You could go to AVA and get all the stuff that I just showed you. But here, when we were in Ask Steve, we were getting that information in a far easier way by simply connecting to that. So when we connected to that, it says, yeah, I know about what the structure of this database is. I've already figured that out. That's part of what this app is, and all of that came ready with it. And then this is far more high level than what you have with that general browser app. So going back to the phone analogy, I could go to my browser app, type in weather.com, then punch in my zip code and look at the weather, and that information will be in a certain form. But if I'm going to do that function very often, then I want a far more convenient way to carry out that business function, and that's what that app ecosystem looks like. So, it's a long answer to your question. Coming back to that, basically, if you're going to connect to a general database, you're going to get the equivalent of the browser app. You'll be able to do all of these compute and other data wrangling stuff, do it far more efficiently than writing code, for sure. And as you realize there are certain business functions that you want to carry out in a far more efficient way, that's when we go and create the apps with a more targeted language surface. Does that help? And so that those apps need to be created, and that's what you get. You get higher business efficiency by way of creating those apps as opposed to a general way of just querying the data, though you're never writing code. You're just interacting with this data at this high level.
Okay.
It's kind of like with the browser app, you could go to any website. We can go to any database and pull that in. But how convenient do you want to make it for the user to ask questions on that? They probably don't want to see all the gory details of all the 50 tables with hundreds of columns and reason about that. And you want to appify that. And the underlying technology we have lets us do that.
Okay. So I think that answers a portion of my question. Eric, how far out are you from being able to integrate with OPC?
Great. As you know, we have recently become a Rockwell partner, and we had a couple of meetings with them to discuss the technology for integration. We will be doing a pilot project for a company about a couple of hours north of us. It's a food processing company, but a heavy Rockwell, PLCs and Logix 5000 user. Okay, so we will be doing that, and we expect that towards the end of the year we will have an integration that we can show, demonstrate, etc. Okay, now in terms of IIoT and predictive maintenance, we are working on developing partnerships with about 4 different companies in that space, IIoT and analytics space, and we are, based on the opportunity, we will be doing integrations with them.
Okay, and so another question. I know this is kind of maybe a double-bladed sword when I ask this. You talked about partnering with Rockwell and utilizing OPC. Knowing that spans across not just Rockwell, but also Siemens PLCs and so on, do you look for that to be on track to communicate with any device that can communicate with an OPC driver?
I mean, as long as they support OPC UA server, Craig, yes, we can support that.
Okay, so all right, so you'll be able to talk to anything that's, what you're envisioning is anything that talks OPC UA.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and UA is backward compatible, as you know, so it should be. I mean, it may need some minor tuning, but we don't know yet. Okay.
Yeah. So you'll be able to UADA the whole deal. I'm with you.
Correct. Correct.
Again, our experience in working with Johnson Controls, who we are also partnered with on their GEM project, they have picked us, and we're working diligently with their development teams on GEM, which is their building analytics package. We're moving along quite readily on that.
And PTC is another company we are partnering with. And as you know, PTC owns a whole bunch of companies, including Capware.
Okay. I wasn't sure they were owned by Kepware, but that's
no,
that's good.
PTC, correct. PTC owns Capware.
Okay.
And Johnson just invested, or Rockwell just invested $1 billion in PTC. Okay. So any other questions for the professor?
Yeah. So on the visualization part, can you, so how does it work with multiple users? Because what I would like to see is, let's say someone generates a report, right? A visualization, right? So we want to take that visualization as a starting point and further build upon that. So something like, let's say someone says, show me the, I mean, sales happens to be the most frequently used term across. So someone says like, show me the highest sales in the southern region, right? So let's say we generate a visualization of that, right? So let's say I'll email it to a few of them, and someone will take that and then say, instead of south, he or she is interested in the northern region, right? So he will just change that one from southern to northern region, right? So he or she will get a different visualization, right? Something relevant to them. Or they will say southern region from February to March, right? So they will take that one as an input, as a starting point, and further, like filter the data. So is that possible here across users?
Yes, so great question. So the way, let's say we just did this over here, we can then say save session as sales, and now you basically have that. You can now share that session file, and you can even replay that session file. So if you were to replay that session file, oops, I need to go back over here. You will basically go and replay that session file of sales, and that basically will carry out that entire session, maybe that specific stuff that you have. I just acted as user number 1, where I saved the session file, user number 2, where I use that same session file to go redo that. Now I can go and change what I wanted to. So, for example, part name contains motor. I don't have sales information here, so I'm just going to make something up over here.
Yeah.
So basically, you can share it very easily, because the one subtle point and really important point which you just hit upon is that when you go and use traditional BI tools, for example, there are 3 things that it misses. First is the BI tools will only give you the answer for what someone who thought you wanted that answer is going to show you, right? You can't navigate around that insights generation space. So, and with data chat you can. The second part is you can navigate through that generation space in a very natural and intuitive way using this controlled natural language. And then the third part is what you typically don't get with existing ways of doing analyses is you just get this chart, but you don't know how did you get this chart, right? So it's kind of like you go to a restaurant and you eat a nice meal, you get the meal, which is great, but you don't have the recipe for the meal. This is the recipe for the meal, and that's also part of the data that is generated. And that data is basically, how did this person think to generate that? That itself is data which you can share in the system and modify from other previous sessions.
Okay, so I can also take this data. So because initially you showed that I can actually get the output for this visualization and use that one to do further queries with only that subset of data, right?
Right. So, for example, now I have this data set over here, which just has cost of parts used and facility name. And I can say, call this data set, sales data. Let's just give it that name. At any point in time, you're creating a whole bunch of data sets. You can list all of them. These are the things that we got from Baseek before: work order, parts, and material cost. We just created this new data set called sales data. And you can do all kinds of things with that. So for example, let's say I wanted to go back and use parts. So I'll start using parts over here. I want to see what's in the parts data set. There's a way to interact with that called describe. That's going to tell you parts has these 7 different fields. If I look at part number, there are 10,000 of them. 2,600 or so are unique. The top one is this, and so on and so forth. So going back, underlying this, there's a whole bunch of functionality. And the whole premise behind data chat is 360 degrees of what you want to do with the data, from raw data loading to wrangling to cleaning to actual querying, visualization. All of that is behind this controlled natural language surface, and that's available. And you can go interact with it in these ways. So we can go back, for example, we can list back the data set that we had. We just saved this data set called sales data. So we'll go back to sales data. We can say describe what's in there. It tells us there are 22 fields. Richmond is the most, they're all unique, of course, because we asked for cost of parts used for each facility name, so that better be unique. But for cost of parts used, it also tells us the minimum is 200, maximum is 26,000, and here's the different quartiles boundaries for that numeric value.
Okay.
Right, so the basic point is there's a lot behind that surface, and we strongly believe that as you deploy it, that you amplify it so that people don't get confused by doing everything, but you have that power below you, and that you create focused apps so that by business functions, so you improve the productivity of that end user, and you don't want to put everything in one app.
Okay.
So,
Any other questions?
any other questions? I mean, we've got the professor's time, and we hopefully this is of value to you.
It is. So Harry, how would it be hosted? Would we host
So
it
this will
in,
be
like,
hosted basically, correct. This will be app on so when we deploy, when we integration done completely, this will be a part of the live site, the prod site. So there will be links. So if you go the link, and you will have all access, chat access. So there will be part of if you log in, there will be icon on the login screen. On the
so something like that. That's what Baseek is saying, is that be something like an icon like that we put in one of those screens, and then it'll take you to stuff that looks like that.
Okay, so that
Open
answers
up a
it.
browser.
That answers it for the Eagle side of things, right? As I'm looking at this, and I think Harish and I know Josh is on here, probably thinking of it the same way. What about, we're thinking bigger picture, right? So certainly we like this, and I think this addresses a number of questions that Josh and myself and others have asked for regarding enhancements with the CMMS, integration to the PLCs. But what about those other databases I was referring to? So I'm thinking, Harish, do you see potential? I know it's early and this is just the first time we talked, but could you see value in this with Sort Director, ClassX, and other systems?
So this can be part of the ecosystem. So there are we already have something going on right now. We are actually tapping into SourceVector database, working with EAP, and building a business intelligence solution. So this can be another solution, and possibly in the future we could all combine together, right? Build a super solution which will also include this data.
Okay. So in short, you see the potential that this has space in the future for other systems aside from the CMMS. Right. So to bring it back, and let me ask you this question, Professor. You know, when we talk about you pull a database in, what about spanning across, you know, multiple databases where there's potentially, and I know this is maybe this is a little far-fetched right now, but there's some correlation. So let's just say that we have a system that tells us our total number of jams and so on, and we're not integrated with, you know, Rockwell today through this. But we have another database that tells us about jams and in a specific facility or something. So we have two separate databases, and we want to look at that and we say, you know, we want to look at, I'm just generically speaking, we want to look at Richmond facility. I want to look at their, you know, cost, their total number of work orders, and then we also want to see the total number of jams that they've had at that facility, and which asset has the most jams.
Yep.
Or which asset has the majority of breakdowns or something like that. But basically being able to couple
Yep.
The two together, just like you would do, right, in like a SQL Management Studio, right? If you're writing a script, you could, if you're writing something, a SQL script, you could bridge it across multiple databases.
Yep. And I'm trying to see if I can create an example for you right now. And the answer is yes, we can do that. And I'll just walk you over what I just did. So we had this data set called parts, and the parts data set had information like that. It had part number and part names and stuff like that. We said, count the number of records for each part number. And so that gave us that information. Here's a small sample of that was shown over here. And then we said, extend this data set with parts, which basically said, I'm going to look at this information I just produced, which has part number and num records that I just created. And then the parts data set that we originally had a part number too. And so we just extended that, which is we combined this piece of information with this piece of information. And in the SQL parlance, for those of you who know SQL, we did a natural inner join between these two tables, and we combined data from these two fields. Now, here the data, I created this other data set right now, but we have that general technology for specific types of ways of merging that information. Right, so we just added a new record. Now your new data set that we have for each part number says, how many times does this part occur in this database? And so we just created that.
But if there were existing...
Yeah, and it did some warning. So there's intelligence behind that for the SQL experts here. What I just did would give me a D grade in computer science because the same part number appears many times in this database here. And so I can do that, but then I'm going to be duplicating that information multiple times, like for this part that 5 appears multiple times. So we also warn you about that. So a lot of what you learn in all the data science classes, a large part of that is already insights and information that the underlying chat technology understands. It will help you along as it goes through.
Yeah, I find the technology, quite honestly, I find the technology to be, you know, and the solution that you've put together here to be very exciting, personally.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And, you know, I know we didn't get a chance to do introductions, but this is my 4th startup. I've been working in the area of data for about 30 years, as I said. My first startup was sold to Teradata, where it was my thesis work on doing large-scale spatial data analysis back in '97. So I'm dating myself now. And that is still being sold by Teradata as part of the BI suite. My second company was a data analytics platform for doing real-time analysis. We sold that to Twitter. So if you ever use Twitter, every screen on Twitter, the real-time information is served on our platform. It serves worldwide billions of queries every day. My third startup was acquired by Pivotal, which just went IPO about 4 months ago. And I served as the chief scientist for a year. And I came back from that because we'd been working on this in the lab, and I knew this was the biggest thing that I would have done so far. We really think we are transforming it. I may be understating, but that last mile of data analytics has been the biggest obstacle so far. We've invested so much time in bringing all the data together in these different data warehouses and databases, and people have spent a large amount of money in that. It's kind of like running the cable to the city center and then saying the rest of the way, I'm just going to have to keep running back and forth to that city center to get my information. And we really want to democratize data science to the end business users, and that's what we are trying to do here.
I think you've done a really great job, an outstanding job. So I compliment you and applaud you on the work that's been done here.
Thank you.
You know, I know that Josh, are you on mute, or are you there, Josh?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, I was getting ready to speak for you, and you may or may not have liked it. So, Josh, I believe you and I kind of chatting a little bit there. Do you see this as solving some of those? Somebody thinks it's solving because it keeps. So I think, Josh, do you see this as solving some of those items that we've asked about before? And I think, Harry and you had some emails going back and forth about, hey, can we kind of build on the fly queries and reports and so on rather than using Crystal or whatever? I think this is one of those areas that addresses that and goes much further, obviously, than just that. Makes it a lot easier. And then the other part, is the integration with Machine IO. Right, the plant floor. What are your thoughts?
So yeah, no, and I was referring to that kind of as a dynamic reporting, right? So, and I think that definitely does solve that problem. The other thing that I'd be curious as to whether or not you can pull values and run. Like standard deviation reports off of it for certain equipment, maybe even understanding what the sigma value is for certain equipment and things like that. So I definitely see some value here and would be curious as to whether or not we get into some of the statistical data that could be pulled from it. And like I said, in terms of standard deviation, Six Sigma, or I'll say sigma value, it may or may not be Six Sigma, but just curious about that as well.
Yeah, and I briefly showed this, I didn't dwell on it, but that's a great question. We have various types of statistical analysis built in. Do we have everything? Maybe not, but if you're missing something that you need, we will figure it out and add it. So for example, we have this really high level way of saying, what's in this data? And we just call it, you just ask for it and say, describe. For example, you can see quantity of parts allocated. Over here is a numeric field, and that we show the different quartiles for it and also the standard deviation. So we pull out what are the bread and butter statistical information and numeric things. Unit cost is another, perhaps a better example. And so those get pulled out and we compute those in the platform.
So I guess the question for Craig is there interest and value in continuing with the professor to move this to the full SQL database for you?
Yeah, I believe that there is. And, there's one individual that's missing from this call that I really wanted to be on this call. And that's my new manager, Jim Atkins. And so, Jim, unfortunately wasn't able to attend, but we knew that there would be some interest in this. So, Harry, I hate to say that we may need to do another.
Well, we recorded
WebEx,
this,
but,
so we can send this to you, Craig.
Yeah, if you could do that, that would be fantastic, because then Jim can look at it, in between meetings or in a flight or whatever. That would be fantastic if you could send that. And I think it's something that Josh, with things changing with my recent shift, obviously we've talked about collaboration, integration, and all that between myself and other groups. I think that, it'd be good to, if you, Josh, if you don't mind, if you could take a copy of this as well and kind of review it with the DFMs and, share it with them and get their input, with regards to the CMMS. Harry, I'd like to, we didn't talk much about the OPC and integration with machine controls. But as you know, I'm very big into integration, single front ends, and so on. I'd really like to have more in-depth conversation around what that looks like with the machines in the future. How the data is being collected, how it'd be used. I don't know if you could put something together with the professor and with Rockwell. But I think it would be of great value if we could start to have some of those conversations. And I think It would be good I think it would be great if, as a part of that, if you can kind of help coordinate that with me. I'd certainly like, Harish, and I'm sure Harish would probably want a few of his team members to be involved with that as well. Just so that we can get a larger audience and get more eyes on it, more ears on it, and expand outside of what one person thinks. Expand it to other individuals' thoughts and where they see potentials.
Yeah, sure, Craig. We'll be happy to arrange that, and we'll just look at everybody's calendar schedule and make a plan in next couple of weeks. What's convenient for everyone.
That would be fantastic, Harshad. I appreciate that.
Sure. Okay. Great. Anything else?
Not for me. Again, I just go back to I guess repeating what I said before. Professor, I appreciate you taking the time to go through this with us, and I think you've created a great tool here based on what I've seen. And I'm hoping that there's we can see some potential value with this in the future. For our installation of Eagle's Proteus MMX, and then obviously, like I said, along with the machine controls and stuff. But in short, Harry, I know you and I have been missing each other on this, and you've been wanting to show it for a while. I appreciate you kind of staying persistent and with me on this and getting it pulled together.
Not a problem, and thanks everybody for your flexibility. We have recorded this. We'll convert it and make it available on a YouTube. And if you have any questions at all, I'm not the guy that'll answer them, but I'll certainly facilitate getting the answer. And I do think the tool goes beyond just our particular database. It goes into any aspect of Amerisource's business. We focused with the professor, of course, on our product, but we know, and the professor knows too, that it can go and extend in any number of ways. And we're happy to, go beyond that with you guys. So thanks for your time today. If there's any other questions, feel free to contact me, and we'll get this out to you as soon as we can get it converted and available on YouTube.
Yeah. Thank you all. Nice to meet you, Harish.
Yes. Thank you, Harish.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Great. You guys have a great day and a good weekend.
Thank you.
Jignesh, thank you very much. Thank you very much.